And welcome back to the show. The Opportunity Agenda is a social justice communications lab that is working to advance the impact of the social justice community. Now, their work is deeply ingrained and intersectional and organized around three main initiatives, which are criminal justice, immigrants and opportunity, and economic opportunity, through which they further their commitments to racial justice, human rights, gender rights, and LGBTQ justice. Joining me now, we're pleased to have the president of the Opportunity Agenda, Ellen Buchman. And Ellen, thank you for joining us.
I'm pleased to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Daren.
Thank you. I'll start off with the question that, is pretty, well, I'll just ask it. Talk to me about social justice, and how do you define social justice?
Wow, great question, Daren. Let me just first say again, thank you. I want to uplift you and the program and your team for doing what you're doing, for being interested in expressing what social justice means. It's really important. We at the Opportunity Agenda believe in making sure that in order to achieve justice and equity for all, we need to be focused on the long-term conversations that are out there to move hearts and minds toward policy shifts. Because without moving hearts and minds, if we focus primarily on the news, and if we focus on telling the story that, let's just say, is the quote hot and sexy story du jour, we ain't gonna get there. We're not gonna come close. And so for us, it's really a question of realizing how we can best be and set the stage for the country that really is as good as its ideals. And as a matter of fact, Daren, I'm really proud to share this with you. Our team just finished late last year, and our board approved a new strategic plan toward the end of achieving social justice, in which we enunciate that all of the narrative work that we do to move hearts and minds toward policy change will be with the objective of making sure that we are doing all that we can to overcome white supremacist narratives that have overcome our country, have overcome our systems, and have overcome, in many instances, people's hearts and minds, because absent those stories that address white supremacy and the systems therein, we're not going to get very far, as I shared with you.
Yeah, and a lot of work to really unpack, and I'll start talking about a few issues, and then we'll go from there. But on the issue of criminal justice, right? We continue to hear criminal justice reform really needing to take place. We've seen some progress, still a lot of work to be done. From your perspective, give us a little bit of insight as to how you view criminal justice and the work that you do.
Yeah, well, thanks for the great question, Daren. We see the justice system, along with other systems, as I suggested before, in our country as being, I would just say, focused on an objective that not only is unjust, but that needs to be challenged. And so that's my initial response to you. We need to challenge a system that in our world incarcerates more than focuses on objectively making sure that folks who have either made error or conducted an injustice can be resuscitated and can be participants in our society in ways that, frankly, we believe everyone should have a shot to be. And our organization, as I shared before, works on changing hearts and minds. So our piece of that long arc toward justice, Daren, really goes to the sort of conversations that are happening in our society about the justice system, and what we as leaders and people within the social justice ecosystem are doing to talk about that. Right? And so, for example, we've released recently an updated version of what we call our criminal justice reform phrase guide, which gives people tips around things like, and it might sound basic to you and to me, but folks that are watching the news might not think in these terms, focused on things like dehumanizing language that we have to address and change. So, for example, if you are someone who has been incarcerated, you should be spoken about as though you are a human being first and not an inmate first, right? This is one of the subtle examples of the sort of things the Opportunity Agenda is really focused on doing, because we have learned through our work and over a lot of research that kind of language and how we represent the system matters, and matters to the change that we are trying to see. Secondly, and I frankly, we could talk a lot about the defund the police movement. I, frankly believe in it. My organization supports thinking about how we can shift resources so that people get the sort of support that they need in nonviolent situations in particular and the like, and so that our country's go-to address those situations is not always with somebody who is armed, a police officer. Again, though, I bring this up, Daren, because it's an example of something that we just recently released a report on, so that we could share not only that efforts around reform in some instances around the country have worked, but that they're not enough, and that we need to really concentrate again on how we talk about what communities in fact need. And while policing is important in our country for some purposes, certainly not in all purposes, and to us at the Opportunity Agenda, it starts with a conversation that is more just.
Yeah. When we talk about defund the police, we can have a few moments just to go unpack that for a second, because we talk about that, as you say, it's really not about it is about taking resources and allocating them to certain areas. So if you had your ideal situation, knowing what we're doing, what you know about what's happening now, how would you like to see this allocation occur? Where would you like to see funded?
Great question. As I said before, our report begins with the best way to counter problematic narratives and harmful narratives so that an affirmative vision can be seen first, is to first address aspirationally what we want to see happen, which is another way to answer your question, Daren. What we would like to see happen, for example, and I mentioned this a little bit before, are more solutions that include things like counselors and experts in particular situations that often arise domestically in families around the country, in which people might need mental health interventions first, as opposed to situations that sadly and many times tragically result in violence because of, in some cases, misuse of weapons. And so for us, one of the things, to answer your question, that the Opportunity Agenda would like to see, and again, this pertains to our piece of the work, which is the story that needs to be told about this, we would like to see rise to the surface. And this is again why I give you a lot of play, Daren, on your show, as to how the attention is given and the light shown upon solutions that are nonviolent. And again, I'll use the example of mental health experts being deployed to situations first, if a situation calls for that. I can think of a lot, and I'm sure you've seen with your own eyes as well, situations on the streets of New York City where people without homes, again, humanizing language, instead of automatically calling them homeless people, they are people without homes, are being addressed in some way for doing something on the street by an armed police officer, as opposed to a mental health professional, or as opposed to a social justice worker or warrior who is addressing our city's homeless situation, who could be deployed but isn't, because the go-to 911 call goes directly to deploying an armed officer. That's the kind of intervention we would really like to see. But also, and again, our work is to shine the light on the story that should be told about that as well.
Yeah, we're having conversations nowadays with that word critical race theory. A lot of it's come under debate. And I know for yourself, that's something that you and your organization are dealing with front and center, and have even come up with the critical race theory guide.
Yeah.
What exactly is this guide?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The attacks on, I could talk a lot about this, but I'm going to resist.
You got it. You got it. Go ahead.
Thanks, Daren. I'll just let you know that the attacks on the critical race theory itself are really in our view at the heart of what our organization is trying to achieve, which is upending white supremacy and the narratives that surround it. And the reason why I'm saying this to you, Daren, in response to this question, is because teaching, and I'll just say to law students, the critical race theory is not used in any other circumstance. So to allege that it is not only not truthful and wrong, but it's again to stretch the white supremacist base's use of this attack so that they promote fear instead of future. And you get people ginned up about it, which is again a tactic and not a solution whatsoever, regardless of what one believes. But anyway, we believe in making sure that kids in school and kids in elementary school, young people in law school and the like, are taught the truth about our country's history, are taught the truth about how our country was founded, are taught the truth about, why our country enjoys what it does systemically. And that is primarily because of and for support for primarily white male property owners. That is what started the United States of America. And so to come at this, absent that lesson, just as one major example that is at the heart of it, is not truthful in our view. And it doesn't do justice to making sure that the premise that everyone in our country has a clear understanding of the roots of it is just unacceptable to us. And so what we did to provide support to partners like the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund that's litigating a lot of these cases, and to other social justice leaders, was to put out this guide around how we talk about this and how we talk about it from an anti-racist viewpoint so that truth could be taught, along with, as I said before, so that we reframe the discussion. Because as we saw during the last election cycle, Daren, and as we know, as it's being called out on Tucker Carlson and the like, to come at this as though the critical race theory is being taught in K through 12 classrooms, and to not respond first to that, and reframe it, doesn't do any good. So we are really starting there and making sure that that truth is told, not only about the subject matter, but about what in fact the critical race theory is.
Yeah, and so when we talk about the subject matter, when we talk about critical race theory, it seems as though many people are still unfamiliar with critical race theory, except for the fact of saying, I don't want it. And when you ask people sometimes, what don't you want? They can't even clearly articulate what it is that they don't want. And I mean, Ellen, for me, it's like a head scratcher, because here it is, you're rebuking something that really you have no knowledge of. And until it's actually unpacked, you really don't even have a clear understanding. And many times, even when it's unpacked, you don't have the clear understanding.
No, it's well said, Daren. I'll compare this to the conversation that often, rises around affirmative action policies. It's very similar in some respects. People, generally white people, who aren't familiar with the policy, think they know what it is, and often, not always, but often, they actually don't. An example, in many instances, and I've done a lot of work on this particular example as well, affirmative action policies, number one beneficiary are white women, has been white women. And when someone like me, when someone who looks like me brings that to their attention, they're like, oh, what do you mean by that? How come I didn't know that? And then that gives me an opening to say, well, there are disparities that white women face. This policy has helped to address them. It is often not discussed because this policy was started to address disparities that African Americans in our country for generations have faced due to being descendants of slaves and the like. And you also should know that living alongside them are white women who also face those same disparities. And lo and behold, this policy has actually successfully addressed those as well. When I have a chance to say those words to people, Daren, they, as you said, they scratch their head and they think about it some more. To me, it's a question of how do we make sure that that same kind of attention is given to the story about critical race theory, instead of, again, baiting people along and saying that it's a theory that promotes fear. Because instead of doing that, we believe in telling the truth, which is what this whole thing is about.
Right. Well, we know that another social justice issue is the area of economic inequality. There are too many people who are living beneath the poverty line. And I equate living beneath the poverty line not just financially, but socially. And there's a lot that can be said about the economic inequality that goes on, but it is financial. But there's also so many other ways that people are living beneath the poverty line. Share with me a little bit about economic inequality. How's your organization tackling this matter, and what's being done?
I'm so glad you asked about this, and I agree with what you just said, Daren. It's about a lot. It's about a large majority of people in our country living paycheck to paycheck. It's about the lack of, again, as I said before, generational support. I don't even want to say wealth, but generational support for people economically that is enjoyed for the most part by white people and not people of color because of generations of disparities and the like. All kinds of things that I could say in support of what you just said. So thank you for that. Our organization right now has a couple of projects that we're really excited about. In addition to deploying narrative strategies around how we talk about these issues, we also deploy cultural strategies and the like. And as I'm sure you would agree, we are surrounded, how's the saying go, Daren? Culture will eat strategy for breakfast anytime.
Yeah.
We're surrounded by culture, and people take in a lot every single day on their TV or on social media that tells a particular story. And so what we did to address economic insecurity and how the story is told about poverty is through what we call our Power of Pop series, which is a research report series we just released. Really a terrific body of research that shows how, I'll just say it, bad a job TV does in depicting how people who live below the poverty line actually live. In many cases, our research reinforces that, but also shows that most shows don't even deal with it, right? And so people have, not surprisingly, I'll just say an inaccurate view. And then they see what they see on the street and they develop their own stereotypes as a result. So one of the things that our organization does is really take in what the culture is showing and develop recommendations around that for change. Again, we believe that stories that unfold can change and move hearts and minds, and then policy will follow that, and our culture and the narrative within it is a huge contributor to that.
I know you do work in terms of organizing, and when I say organizing, really imploring upon people the need to understand a little bit better through workshops and having the opportunity to have some training to give people a better understanding of what's going on and how things are going and how they can actually be accomplished through their help. So when it comes to workshops and training, how do you go about educating the masses and really giving them the much needed resources, Ellen, to really be able to be engaged in this? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there, right? And I think that when you talk about countering that misinformation, you got to get people to the table. You got to get them educated.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more, Daren. So one of the things that we are really aware of is that the organizations and the leaders within the social justice ecosystem, the racial justice ecosystem, are going to be best positioned to reach the people that are members of their organizations. Ellen Buchman is not in the best position to reach the members of Color of Change. However, I use that example to say that the leadership of Color of Change works with our organization, and there are many other examples of organizations and leaders with whom we work there, and they just popped into my head as one example, so that we can equip them with the sort of resources that I'm describing to you, the phrase guide, the resources for how to talk about racism, how to talk about the anti-Asian movement in our country, how to talk about the tough issues that people either often don't want to talk about or don't know how to talk about successfully, so that they can then take those resources to their members themselves. So that's point one. Point two, we offer signature work in our training. Zoom just, you look at your hair all day, sorry. And we are an organization that is well known for training cohorts of social justice leaders in the format of training to give them, as we say, the space and the place to practice making sure that the language that we're advising is actually comfortable in their mouths, right? And so we will work with leaders to do that. We have a communications institute in which we provide that support. We provide support to cultural leaders and artists in a retreat format in the creative change retreat, not to provide them with training, but a space and a place to actually come up with ideas that will make interventions in popular culture, like the TV show issue that I described to you. We bring together those artists and those people so that they can figure out, all right, how do we address those issues better so that we can get better representation as a result. And then finally, we try and make our research available to as many people that we possibly can. One of our, for example, most popular reports that was actually released in 2011, but is still, if I'm not mistaken, one of the most downloaded things on our website, is a report that shows the representation of Black men and boys in our culture and how it is stereotypical at best, and why hearts and minds could actually shift if that representation were improved upon. And so we really work hard to meet people where they are and provide them with that picture and a set of recommendations, which I think makes the opportunity agenda stand out, because often you get like gloom and doom news from research reports without recommendations, and that's not how we roll. We believe in giving recommendations by way of support to readers, to leaders, to people in social movement spaces, so that they not only have that research, but also have recommendations for what to do with it.
Well, we got to leave it there, but I want to thank you so much for being with us here and sharing a little bit about the opportunity agenda. Now, for people who want more information, tell us, what do they do?
Thank you for the question so much. If people would like more information about Team TOA, as I like to say, the Opportunity Agenda can be reached at opportunityagenda.org. I'm Ellen Buchman, president of the Opportunity Agenda, and would love to be a resource to anyone. Y'all better come, because we have a lot to do toward achieving true social and racial justice. Thank you so much, Daren.
Ella, it's been great having you. I really appreciate the conversation, the much needed work that's going on in our community around the area of social justice, and you being able to bring to light and then also bring some solutions that we can possibly see in rectifying a lot of the social justice inequalities that so many people are dealing with. So, Ellen, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. You have a great day, Daren. Take care.
You too.